Hi, everyone. We are on episode 7 of the Chatting with Asta series on YouTube. And if you're enjoying this series, especially this episode today with Adam Stovall, please don't forget to thumbs up, which means you liked it, subscribe, comment. It means the world if you share it. And so today I've got this wonderful guest, Adam Stovall. I was introduced to him through the indie film world, and I am one of the lucky U.S. members to have seen your film, A Ghost Waits.
Yes.
So welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course.
I'm doing pretty well. I went for like a nice long walk this morning, socially distanced with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. So yeah, it's just, not shook the rust off and feeling good.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm with my very large movie collection. It's like larger than my head.
Physically large. They're all dwarfing you, yeah.
Yeah, this is totally me. I always have like at least 3 to 4 copies of a bunch of Criterion films. I know you love your Criterion. I have my Criterion channel,
Yep.
obsessed. I actually own a few Criterion movies right now that I really, really need to remind myself to watch this week. I have The Red Shoes, which I still haven't seen yet.
Oh, yeah.
What's wrong?
The Red Shoes set me down like one of my favorite rabbit holes because I'd never seen an Archer's movie before that.
Yeah.
And then, you hear like Scorsese and everybody talks about how great it is. And watching that, I was like, yeah, these guys are great. And then I ended up seeing A Matter of Life and Death at the Museum of the Moving Image over in Astoria. And it's just crazy. These guys were making movies in the 40s, and you watch them now and they feel modern.
Yeah. It's one I've been told to see over and over again, and I went through similar rabbit hole when I saw L'Avventura a couple years ago, and I was just like, this is my mood. This is my aesthetic. So, yeah, we all have the classics that we haven't yet to see because either make time for it or so. Yay, Criterion.
Yeah, my copy of Stalker is staring at me right now. Like, right, you do have movies you haven't seen yet that you need to.
I keep watching all the, I call them trashy, but I love them, like, different Lifetime movies and, like, B-horror movie. Like, I keep watching those instead. But food is comfort. Movies are comfort food for us. Which, it's funny because, Adam, you introduced me to Letterboxd. I think that's how you
okay. Yeah.
I started using it, and I've been really bad about using it in quarantine because there's some films I'm like ashamed to admit I watched or like rewatched. Or I really need to make like a quarantine viewing list. But yeah. Anyway, back to your films and your perspective. A Ghost Waits. Something that I can't wait for people to eventually see this film because it really touches on something that a lot of people are going through right now. I want you to talk about the film, but like really, about this idea of loneliness and like searching for connection. Like, how did this all come about? And like, yeah, let's
Okay. A Ghost Waits specifically, I always feel like I need to start it like the year before it happened because McLeod Andrews and McLeod's, my best friend and producing partner and male lead actor in the movie. But we spent a year trying to make another movie called There's Nothing Outside. And 10 months, spent 10 months casting a table read, and, we were meeting with, potential investors and just couldn't quite get enough money together. And, after you spend you spend a year of your life trying to make something and it doesn't happen, you're not quite sure what's next.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Northern Kentucky, which is where I grew up. And I was visiting some friends, and they had me, I'm not a video game person, but they had me play this game called PT, which is a first-person haunted house puzzle game designed by Guillermo del Toro and Hideo Kojima. And it's just creepy as hell and like wonderfully atmospheric. And I had them cracking up laughing while I was playing it because it was just me interacting with a haunted house.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I don't need to find. There's a dirty sink and a baby crying in it. Like, I don't need to check that out. I'm fine. And so I had them laughing, and I thought, there might be a movie in a character like myself having to deal with a haunted house. And so as I was kind of thinking about that, I saw this webcomic, Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, where guy asks this girl, "What do you think is the most American movie?" And she says, "Oh, easy, Ghostbusters." He says, "You think Ghostbusters is the most American movie?" And she's like, "Yeah, here's this movie where you have demonstrable proof of an afterlife, but the whole thing is about growing a small business and navigating government bureaucracy." And I thought, well, that's hilarious, but also like I do want to see that movie.
Yeah.
And as luck would have it, one of the investors that we'd met through trying to make There's Nothing Outside reached out to our mutual friend Nick Thurcattle, who's how we kind of came to know him in the first place. And he asked Nick, what's Adam working on? And Nick, we had just talked, and he said, "Oh, I think he's got some like weird idea for a haunted house movie." And the guy, we hopped on the phone. I walked him through what I knew of the story at that moment, and we are talking like a month, maybe a month and a half into having this idea. And he said, "That sounds great. I'll put in X amount of money." And then my mom had said for a while, when you have a number, if it's something that we can do, let us know, and we'll do what we can. And so I called her and I said, "Well, I have this amount of money. If you can match it, I can make a movie." And so a few days later, she called and said, "We've talked to the money guy, and yeah, we can match it." And then I had to write the script. And it's funny. I haven't really had to go through and like forensically figure out where all the little pieces of it came from. I figure that'll happen at some point, but it was so much fun. So like my own creative process tends to start when I don't think something works, like because there's no shortage of ideas.
Yeah.
But once an idea I feel like doesn't work, then I have a puzzle to solve.
Yes.
And that's kind of when I really get interested. So the idea of writing a haunted house movie, well, those have been done 6 Ways from Sunday.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, at this point in horror overall, it's why I think independent horror is doing so much more, is because that's where people, because of the lower cost of entry, you will get some people who all they want is to make a movie, and so they don't put any real thought into examining or interrogating tropes. But then you also get people like me and Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and people who are just like, this movie has been made a million times, like what is new, or what is the metaphor that I can bring to this that like I haven't seen before. And so what I did know was that when I was a kid, I grew up a pretty lonely kid. We moved around a lot when I was really little, and then just, I don't know, I was a sensitive little boy in Northern Kentucky in the 80s and 90s. You can only be called things. So but movies were always there.
Yes.
And movies made me feel less alone. And so I knew as I got older and suffered the various indignities of life that was something that I wanted to do for someone else. And that's kind of been the North Star of just like, how can I create something that is kind and patient and that like somebody else might need to hear.
Yeah, and also movies, the thing about art in general, but I think with movies too, especially, is that the viewer and the time period and the location can affect what that art becomes. Like I was thinking about your movie when I just started watching this series called Afterlife.
Yeah.
Have you seen
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's really, really delightful. And just a meditation on this idea of like, how can you be affected by like a connection, and what are connections with people and things, and how does that change when death comes into play, and you kind of explore that in a very literal way in Ghostface. I won't give away any spoilers, but you kind of explore and like bring in this idea of like, what if you could take a leap of faith and make a deeper connection with someone, and like, I mean, all these things, like your film can be interpreted in so many different ways by so many different people. And I think for me overall, anyone I know that has seen it kind of takes the same comfort though, because they place their experiences on the connections they've made with people. And right now everyone is so like, even me, I'm lucky to live with my husband and my rabbit and everything, but it's been very important to have not only these filmed conversations, but these, you know, these connections with people. And a lot of it comes from recommending movies. A lot of it comes from being like, I just experienced this from the perspective of what's going on in the world right now, and I think that you could use this perspective right now. And I think you really grasp that. And I actually did manage to read some of your script that you were talking about that you were building with your author, and I totally get it. Like, you have this way of trying to strip the veneer of life, like the difference between, like, you know, a shiny coat and like the truth of what people are, you know. And I like that you decided to use like maybe you've changed it since I saw it, but that you use black and white as like.
Oh, it's black and white.
Okay, cool. All right, I've seen films where they're like, oh yeah, honey, that was the pre-festival, pre-test screening, and I'm like, oh shit, I shouldn't be talking about this. But no, I like that. It kind of reminded me of some of Kevin Smith's early work, which is very focused on the dialogue and the characters they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, the main thing in the movie that like is so hard to talk about without giving anything away. What I find interesting is that, like, if you want to be very literal about it, then the movie, it's called A Ghost Waits. Like, you know, there's a ghost, so you know there's an afterlife, and it introduces maybe a bit more of like what it is to have an afterlife than most other movies, but because of the context that it establishes, he basically just moves to Denver for a girl.
Yeah.
And then if you don't want to be literal, I honestly think like so much of this is a Rorschach, and I mean that's art in general, but like there were some people after the movie that were worried about the ending because they felt that it maybe romanticized something that they felt shouldn't be romanticized, whereas people who struggle with what it depicts are like, I got so many hugs and thank yous. I got really beautiful messages from people that said that it made them feel seen and heard and less alone. And what I kind of walked out of all that with, because it had been such an issue, such a concern, I should say, for McLeod and for a few other people, like, well, how are people going to respond to this? And what I kind of came out with is, if you don't struggle with it, it's not for you. I hope you enjoy it, and I worked really hard to make it not awful for somebody who doesn't suffer from this problem. But if you do suffer from it, it's such a taboo subject that no one ever engages with it. The second you start to talk about it, you get cut off. And so what I wanted to do was empathize with the taboo.
Yeah.
You know, it's that Roger Ebert quote of like, a film is a machine for empathy. Like, if I can help you get into the shoes of somebody who struggles with something you've never struggled with, like, I've done my job.
Yeah. I mean, and I think when you were talking about like how you were trying to pitch one movie and then you ended up with another movie, you know, I've been in conversations where I'm trying to pitch like one very detailed situation film, and then it ends up being that the more simplified one becomes the Trojan horse for whatever issues, you know. And I think that's what you accomplished with this film. It's like it's great when artists reflect not only the times, but like specificity in issues, especially if they do feel something with it. If you inject some of your own truth into it, it will resonate. Like a guest that I had earlier on here, Frank, like I asked him like, what does he do for his art? And he just like, I want to make something that I want to see. And that we are all, whether it be doppelgangers or just like the same tribe, you know, vibe, tribe, whatever, we'll end up relating. And I think that what the art that doesn't always land is the kind that is trying to please people in a way that is very surface. So
well, I mean, because if you're chasing if you're chasing somebody else's first base, you're never going to get there because it's always shifting. Like you have to kind of run your own bases. And what's sad, I think it's a big problem in a lot of modern independent cinema is you have a lot of people, because it's never cost this little to make a movie. The access to the technology, the access to all of it, and so you get a lot of people who are making movies because they love them, and that's fine. But like, have a second thought. And one thing I kind of figured out is that in my writing process, my ending is my point, which is not to say that I always know my ending when I start, but it's how I know when I'm done is, okay, this is what I want to explore. This is my ending. Okay, that's what I'm building towards.
Yeah.
And whereas your beginning is kind of your idea. And it's why I think a lot of modern independent cinema has really strong first acts, because they had a hell of a hook, but then it kind of peters out because they don't know exactly what they're talking about. They don't have an idea or a point to build to.
Yeah, I like to, I mean, I'm not a major filmmaker or anything yet, but I know that
You've made more than most.
And I'm hoping to keep doing that. I like to come at things from just like an abstract feeling, because I think that like I respond to poetry, and I write a lot of poetry, and sometimes I'll make it into songs and stuff, and or like I'll draw something, and it may not be the most like in everyday life. I like to make lists and things like that, but sometimes like when you come at it from like a feeling, Cassavetes or not, you're able to like funnel that into, like you said, a point. But a hook is such a difficult thing, because a hook can be the thing that gets you the investor. A hook can be the thing that gets marketing on board with you. A hook can be the thing that gets your like star cast involved from the get. Like, but it's so much more work to not only hook, but like bring everyone to do the job of telling your story.
Yeah.
And I think that McLeod does a fantastic job as your lead. He really like embodies this feeling of like, just like, just this like seemingly ordinary Joe, but he's got this soulfulness to him. And I think that comes from you being able to not only direct him like logistically, but being able to communicate to him what you wanted to do with this, even if you weren't sure what you wanted to do with it initially. You kind of
it's really the best part of having kind of your best friend as your key collaborator, is that there's such a great shorthand, and you can speak in incomplete sentences and know what each other is saying. And then the emotional climax of the movie, there came a point. He is one of those guys that can just flip a switch. He'll help carry a light, and then just, okay, now I can do the scene. And it's crazy. But there was one scene where he could not do that. He had to put himself into a headspace, and he was listening to the song, and we shot for very little money, and we didn't have a ton of time for a lot of takes or anything. And so we were running through this scene, and it was good, but it wasn't right. It wasn't enough. And so I walked up to him, and I gave him a little hug, and I said, hey, like, that's really good, but like, I need to see you break, and I'm not going to call cut until I do. And he delivered the take that's in the movie, but like, it's cut down quite a bit from what we shot. And it was so cool to like, not only see him kind of get to this space that like, as an actor, I've never seen him get to before, but the room was electric. Everyone in there, and it was a very small crew, but everyone was just like, call cut, call cut, call cut. Oh my God, call cut. Because they're watching their new best friend like cry and be gutted. And so then when I said, okay, cut, like just the whoosh of air, like, oh yes, it works.
And speaking of whoosh, you got to go through quite a whirlwind experience bringing this to a festival.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, yay. And then the world is like, get back home. Like, shut down. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel for so many different. I mean, I think that's part of why I'm doing this. Like, I feel like there's so many people who,
Yeah.
under ordinary circumstances, would have this amazing spotlight on their work. They would be meeting people and all this stuff. And I mean, how are you doing with that? You seem pretty level headed. I mean,
I think that's the Midwesternness in me. No, well, let me first say that like my heart is so with people whose first film was about to premiere and then it got canceled by COVID. Like, oh my god, because we screened as part of FRIGHTFEST Glasgow, and the Glasgow Film Fest was the penultimate festival to happen before everything shut down. It was Glasgow, it was True False, and then nothing. Um, and so yeah, like I mean, this is my favorite. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. So it's my favorite story to tell. We had gotten a bunch of rejections. When we finished it, we showed it to friends and family. We started sending it out, and we took some moonshots. We sent it to Sundance. We sent it to South by Southwest, all that stuff. And I got very good at getting the email like, "Your movie's wonderful, and it's not a judgment on that. And please keep sending us stuff in the future and paying that submission fee." And so I got very good at rejection. And then in mid-November, early to mid-November last year, my dad had a stroke. And yeah, like, and it was I mean, it's like a crazy roller coaster because I was seeing Doctor Sleep on opening night because McLeod is in Doctor Sleep, and I'm just like, oh my god, my best friend is a shining ghost. I should I'm gonna get my phone out and do the rookie move of like taking a picture of his name in the credits, and I did that, and then I turned on my phone, and my dad had a stroke. So I'm just on the subway crying, and then my mom had come up. She was coming up because we had a screening. We had a private screening. The Criterion Collection hosted the private screening of the movie. She came up for that. I went down to Delaware to be with her because I was like, well, I may have to fly to Ohio or Kentucky to be with Dad if things take a turn. So the plan had been to be there for Thanksgiving. How is this at all relevant to a film festival, Adam? I'm getting to it. So I was in Delaware, and we were doing all our work on the house, and so we would go to see just a ton of movies, and three a week at least. And we went to see Ford versus Ferrari, and I get out and I go into the bathroom. I turn my phone on, and there's an email from Paul McAvoy of FRIGHTFEST saying this movie is brilliant and moving and beautiful, and you're in for Glasgow. And so my poor mother, who has like been watching this whole thing with my dad, they're not together anymore. So she's been watching through me all this stuff and hearing from my sister. All she sees is me come out of the bathroom, go straight to her, hug her, and start crying. And she's just like, well, this doesn't seem like a bad cry, but like, what's happening? And just, we got into a festival. And then she starts crying, and my aunt's crying, and the girl working at the concession stand is like, what is happening? And that was the story of getting into Glasgow. So I didn't even have a passport. I've never traveled internationally. I'm a basic ass boy from Kentucky. And yeah, so like this happens, and I'm like, oh, I need to get my passport, I guess. So like there's that whole thing, and get that taken care of, and just they set it up. They flew me over. They put me up, and so I go over. I thought I was being really smart. I went over a day early to like a red-eye flight so that I could sleep, and then I'd have time. But then there were two babies in front of me who decided to cry in tandem the entire flight. So there was no sleeping. My body was very ready to sleep because I took 2 melatonin, but my brain was on fire. So I just tasted madness for 7 hours. And I get to Glasgow, and I check in, and I'm like, I go get my stuff, and it's just, I went and saw 2 movies, and I fell asleep in the last one. I was like, okay, I definitely need to go to sleep now. And then I met Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who were there for Synchronic. And we were at a filmmaker happy hour, and I'm such a huge fan of theirs. So I see Aaron, and I walk over just like, hey, I don't mean to bother you. My name's Adam Stovall. I also have a film in FRIGHTFEST. I'm so excited to see Synchronic. Big fan of what you guys do. And Aaron looks at me and says, yeah, Adam, we know who you are. And I was like, I don't know what to do with that. So yeah.
Cry in a corner.
Yeah, it was just feeling everything. And from then on, like the guys, the 4 guys who run Fright Fest were all so warm and just so wonderful, and they loved the movie so much, and they kept saying, you know, like, we never all 4 agreed on a movie, and we all agreed on this one. You know, like, this is our favorite movie of the festival. And you think, like, well, yeah, probably say that to all filmmakers. But then I'm watching them tell other filmmakers that about mine. It's like, oh, shit. Okay. So between them telling everybody they needed to see a Ghost Waits and, you know, me walking around Glasgow sounding like this. So if I ordered coffee or food, people were just like, why are you here? And I say, oh, I have a movie. Like, if you're free Friday night, you should come. And so that day, like, did an interview for Fright Fest, had a panic attack. Some friends took me out to have a drink. I had Iron Brew, which is this like Scottish soft drink, because I just like, no alcohol yet. I don't think my body can handle it. And then it was time for the screening. And I walk in, and the theater that it showed in holds 400 people, and it was packed. We sold out our world premiere.
It's amazing.
And I sat down, I introduced the movie. I sat down off to the side so that I could leave if I had to. And then I just watched it with 400 strangers. And they laughed and they cried, both at the appropriate times. And then there was a very, very wonderful applause afterwards. And we did a Q&A, which is online. And it was funny because Alan, who's a very renowned film critic in the UK, you know, he starts this, you know, how do you feel? And it's like, well, I've been working towards this since I was 8 years old. So at the moment, I feel everything. And I just started crying, and, you know, then the Q&A went from there. But yeah, like the most amazing, you know, one of the things I really struggled with, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, but like just the definition of the word struggle. Like, for a long time, I didn't feel like a filmmaker because I was still making one. I hadn't made a film. And until this was done, I never felt quite right with that title. And then, you know, it's done, it gets into this, I'm over there. And I remember, like, when I was checking in, and then when I went to the filmmaker happy hour, I was talking to the volunteers of the festival, because that's who I was most comfortable with, because I volunteered at a festival. I know what they're doing. I don't know how to be this. But then for people like Bunsen and Moorhead, Joe Bagos, Ryan Spindell, Nicholas, just all these people who have been working for so long and been making incredible stuff, just welcomed me in. And there was no sort of like the rookie, or there was no hazing. It was just immediately like, oh, you're in the club. Yeah. And that has been a really hard thing to kind of get my head around. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that is something that I feel is like vital, that kind of initiation. It's more than just a validation. It just kind of like gives you the confidence that your voice resonates somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and speaking of like voice resonating, what kind of message do you want to send out to the universe, and specifically the universe that is filled with people who just finished their first film and they couldn't get it to the festival, or want to finish their first film but they couldn't do their reshoots, and, you know, people who are creating now, like, what kind of message do you want to send out to them, and just everyone for that matter?
I was thinking about this, because you ask this at the end of every episode, and I was thinking, like, what you said, it is, what do you want me to tell the universe? And I was saying that, like, I'm not really comfortable telling people anything, but I have a question I'd like you to ask the universe, which is, why are you doing what you're doing?
Okay.
Why do you do what you do? I feel like if people spend a little bit more time with that, I honestly think people would be happier, because I think too often we act thoughtlessly. We act in the immediate present, and we look at, if there's two options, what's going to feel best. And I think so many people go down a path of bad decisions because of one immediate concern. And if you just take a moment and breathe and think about what kind of person, because anything you do, you're the kind of person who does that. So what kind of person do you want to be? Because that is just a pile of your own decisions. So yeah.
That's a good one. And I definitely know what you're talking about. I think that the way I see that, or the way I phrase it is, are you a proactive or reactive person? Like, do you react to your circumstances, or do you like think about them and then create new actions? And I think that that's the mess. I mean, it's a question, but it's still a message, because
absolutely,
it's something to meditate on, much like your film. And thank you so much for joining me today. And I can't wait for the universe to see your film. And
well, and if the universe needs something in the meantime, I've been working with Ted Gagan on the podcast This Is Not a Story About, which
I just had a cry fest about the latest episode.
Oh yeah, Adrian's.
Oh my God, so amazing, guys! Check it out. I'll put a link to that as well, and just keep kicking ass, Adam. And
I'll do my best.
Yourself and creating things that clearly resonate with other people.
Thank you.
Why do you do what you do?